April 14th, 1945, just after midnight. Zwolle is dark under a low Dutch sky, the streets slick with rain and oil. Somewhere beyond the last houses, Canadian guns wait in silence, laid on their bearings, crews listening for the order that will turn the city into a map of impacts. On the outskirts, two soldiers from Régiment de la Chaudière slip forward, close to the hedgerows and drainage ditches. Their mission is simple on paper: measure the resistance, find the seams, spare the town if they can. Then a burst of gunfire cuts through the quiet. One man goes down and does not rise. The other does not turn back. He steps into Zwolle alone, carrying a decision that will force an entire German unit to choose between holding the city or disappearing into the night. Every day, we tell real stories from World War II. By subscribing to the channel and clicking the bell button, you help preserve these stories for future generations. Early April 1945. The war in Western Europe is folding, inward on itself, but it is not ending gently. On the German side, formations that once fought by doctrine now fight by exhaustion and orders that change by the hour. The Reich still holds parts of the Netherlands, not because it can truly defend them, but because every road junction and canal crossing buys time for something else. Withdrawals, regrouping, the movement of men who are trying to reach safer lines to the east. For the Dutch population, that delay is paid for in days of hunger, ration cards that mean nothing, and nights where the sound of an engine can bring panic back into a quiet street. In many towns, the occupation is not a front line, but a presence. Checkpoints, patrols, sudden searches, the constant knowledge that any open resistance can be answered with collective punishment. The Allied push north is different now. It is not the desperate breakout of 1944 or the bitter winter fighting after Arnhem. It is methodical pressure by a force that has learned how to reduce positions without wasting men. Canadian formations move through a landscape that is both flat and treacherous. Dikes, canals, narrow roads, bridges that can be demolished in minutes, and open fields that expose infantry to machine gun fire the moment daylight arrives. Every town becomes a decision. If the defenders are weak, speed matters. Seize the crossings. Keep the retreating enemy from establishing the next line. If the defenders are strong, firepower matters. Artillery first, then infantry, then armor, each step calculated. But the Netherlands is not an empty battlefield. These are living streets, houses full of civilians, churches, hospitals, neighborhoods that cannot be rebuilt by victory alone. So commanders weigh necessity against damage. They plan for bombardment because it saves Allied lives, then look for the alternative that might save the town. Zwolle sits inside that dilemma, large enough to matter, positioned in the path of advance, and rumored to be held by Germans who may fight simply because they have not yet been ordered to leave. In the hours before the Canadians commit their guns and their battalions, they need to know what waits behind the darkness. That need is what shapes the order that comes down quietly. Before the artillery speaks, someone must go forward and listen to the city itself, starting with two men moving toward the outskirts. The task is reconnaissance, not conquest. Two volunteers from Régiment de la Chaudière are sent ahead of the main body. Their instructions are narrow and deliberate. Probe the edge of Zwolle. Determine the scale of German resistance. Make contact with the Dutch underground if possible, and return with information that will decide whether artillery is used at dawn. They move light. Urban fighting favors speed and silence, not weight. The night conceals them, but it also compresses sound. Footsteps echo, metal clicks carry farther than expected. Somewhere inside the city, German sentries are already on edge. By April 1945, even routine patrols expect sudden violence. Not long after crossing into the outskirts, that expectation becomes reality. A German patrol appears where none was expected. The exchange is brief and chaotic. In the confusion, Corporal Willie Arsenault is hit. He falls, mortally wounded, on a road that neither side controls long enough to pause. The firefight breaks off as quickly as it began, leaving silence and a body in the dark. At that moment, the mission could end. One man alone cannot recon an occupied city. Withdrawal would be logical. Withdrawal would be safe. Instead, Léo-Major makes a decision that is neither written nor ordered. He leaves Arsenault behind. There is no way to move him without drawing attention, and continues forward alone. The objective does not change. If anything, it becomes heavier. Artillery is still waiting behind him. The guns will fire unless he can bring back certainty. Major understands the nature of fear in an occupied city. Germans expect resistance groups, not lone scouts. They expect coordinated attacks, not isolated movement. That expectation can be used, carefully. He moves deeper into Zwolle, avoiding open streets, listening for engines, boots, shouted orders. He is not hunting enemy units. He is measuring confidence. Are the Germans preparing to fight or preparing to leave? Every step now carries a different risk. Capture means interrogation. Death means silence, and silence means the guns will speak at dawn. Somewhere inside the city, Major will find the answer. And once he does, the night itself will begin to work against the men still holding Zwolle. Human Zwolle at night does not sleep. It holds its breath. Behind shuttered windows, families listen for boots on stone, for the scrape of metal on a doorframe, for the sound that means someone else is being taken. Months of occupation have trained people to read danger in fragments. Voices too loud, engines stopping where they should not, sudden quiet after shouting. When gunfire cracks in the distance, it does not register as a battle. It registers as consequence. Someone has moved when they should not have. Someone has been seen. Léo-Major moves through this city as an intruder twice over, enemy to the Germans, unknown to the civilians. He cannot knock on a door without risking the people behind it. He cannot ask directions. Every choice isolates him further, but isolation is the condition he must survive in. There is no triumph in this movement, only pressure. The knowledge that each minute increases the chance that someone innocent will be caught between plans made far away and reactions made in fear. Tactical. From a military perspective, Zwolle is a problem of perception. A small German force that believes it is about to be surrounded behaves very differently from one that believes it can hold until morning. One calls for artillery support or digs in. The other looks for exit routes. Major does not need to defeat anyone. He needs to disturb certainty. Urban terrain magnifies sound and confusion. A single burst of automatic fire can seem like a skirmish. Two explosions in different streets suggest coordination. Movement without visible support suggests infiltration. The goal is not to fight, but to be noticed in the wrong way. Each German response, returned fire, shouted orders, hasty patrols, reveals something. Panic travels faster than orders, and when orders do come, they must pass through men who no longer trust the silence. In this environment, a lone figure can shape the behavior of a larger force, not by strength, but by uncertainty. Zwolle becomes less a city and more a question the German garrison cannot quickly answer. And unanswered questions, in war, have a way of forcing retreats before daylight arrives. Technological, the weapons Major carries are ordinary for 1945 infantry, nothing designed for spectacle. A Stien submachine gun, grenades, ammunition counted by weight, not abundance. In daylight, this is insufficient to dominate streets. At night, it becomes something else. The Sten's sharp, irregular report echoes unpredictably between brick walls. Grenades, when used sparingly, do not clear buildings. They announce presence. Each detonation is less about destruction than implication. Something is moving. Something is coordinated. Something larger may be arriving behind it. Urban acoustics amplify mistakes. A dropped magazine sounds like movement. A door slamming sounds like withdrawal. For defenders already short on sleep and clarity, technology becomes psychological before it is lethal. Even fires, when they appear, are read as signals. A burning vehicle or structure suggests abandonment or sabotage. Whether these impressions are accurate matters less than how quickly they spread through a unit already considering retreat. Leadership, Diches, moral major, holds no command authority that night. His rank gives him no right to alter the plan. Yet leadership is not always issued with insignia. He understands what artillery will do to Zwolle. He also understands what hesitation will do to the men behind him if the city resists. The decision is not between courage and fear. It is between two kinds of responsibility. If he fails, the bombardment will begin. If he succeeds, it will not be because he defeated the enemy, but because he removed the need to destroy a city to secure it. This form of leadership leaves no witnesses in the moment. There are no orders shouted, no formations advancing. There is only restraint exercised under pressure. By dawn, the Canadians will make their decision based on what one man brings back from the dark. And by then, Zwolle's fate may already be sealed, not by firepower, but by the absence of it. The decisive hours begin after midnight, when the city settles into a deeper quiet. Major moves without a pattern that can be mapped. He avoids main roads, then deliberately crosses them. He fires, briefly, then disappears. He throws sound into the darkness and waits to hear how it returns. German reactions come in fragments. A truck engine starts, then stops. Orders are shouted, then contradicted. Patrols move too quickly, bunching together, signaling fear rather than control. These are not the actions of a force preparing a coordinated defense. They are the actions of men trying to decide whether they are already being cut off. At several points, contact is made. Short, violent encounters, never prolonged. The goal is not to hold ground. It is to confirm what the Germans believe is happening. Each exchange suggests the same thing. The defenders think the Canadians are already inside the city in strength. Somewhere during these movements, Major makes contact with members of the Dutch resistance. The details of these meetings vary across accounts, and some specifics remain uncertain. What is consistent is the outcome. Confirmation that German units are preparing to leave, not reinforce. Withdrawal routes are being discussed. Equipment is being abandoned rather than repositioned. This is the moment the night tips. A garrison that intends to fight behaves differently. It consolidates. It establishes fields of fire. It calls for support. None of that is happening here. Instead, there are gaps. Streets that were patrolled earlier fall silent. Positions that should be occupied are empty. The city begins to hollow out, block by block, without announcement. Major continues to move, not to accelerate the withdrawal, but to make sure it is real. A premature conclusion would be fatal. If he misreads the situation and the Germans hold until morning, the Canadians will walk into prepared defenses or shell the city by necessity. Time compresses as dawn approaches. The eastern sky lightens just enough to threaten exposure. Remaining in the city becomes more dangerous by the minute. What matters now is proof, and that proof is forming quietly as trucks move west. Weapons are left behind, and the sound of boots fades instead of multiplying. By the time Major turns back toward Canadian lines, Zwolle is no longer a defended position. It is an empty question, already answered by the men who chose not to stay. Major leaves Zwolle in the early hours before full daylight, moving fast now, no longer shaping perception, but racing time itself. Behind him, the city does not erupt. There are no alarms, no last stands, no sudden counterattacks. The silence is different from before. It is not tense. It is vacant. When he reaches Canadian lines, the information is delivered without ceremony. German forces are withdrawing. Defensive positions are unoccupied. The resistance confirms it. Artillery is no longer necessary. For commanders, this is not a moment of celebration. It is a calculation revised under pressure. Orders written for bombardment are voided. Guns remain cold. Infantry prepares to advance cautiously, expecting traps that never come. At first, light Canadian troops move into Zwolle. They encounter abandoned weapons, empty checkpoints, vehicles left where fuel ran out or orders stopped arriving. Doors open slowly. Civilians step into streets that were dangerous hours earlier, unsure whether the quiet is real. There is no single flag raised, no dramatic surrender. The city is liberated by absence. Only later does the shape of the night become clear. German units, convinced that Allied forces had already penetrated the city in strength, chose withdrawal over encirclement. The decision spared them destruction and spared Zwolle something worse. Major does not accompany the first wave into the city. His work is already complete. The success is measured not in terrain seized, but in shells that never fell. The artillery plan, designed to save Allied lives at the cost of urban destruction, is erased by information gathered one street at a time. In that erasure lies the turning point of the operation. Zwolle is taken intact. What began as a reconnaissance mission becomes a decisive act. Not because the enemy was overwhelmed, but because they were persuaded, in the dark, that staying would be fatal. And as the sun rises over a city that still stands, the war moves on, leaving behind a night that will not be understood all at once, but will be felt immediately by those who wake to quiet instead of fire. The morning of April 14th, 1945, arrives without the damage everyone had prepared for. Canadian infantry move through Zwolle carefully, rifles ready, expecting resistance that never appears. Each intersection is checked. Each building is approached as if it might still be occupied. But the pattern repeats itself. Empty positions, discarded equipment, hastily abandoned posts. For civilians, the change is immediate and disorienting. The soundscape of occupation, commands, boots, engines, has vanished. People step outside in cautious stages, watching the soldiers for confirmation that the night's silence is real. There is relief, but it is restrained. Too many false dawns have come before. No official casualty figures define the night's events inside the city. That absence is itself the point. Zwolle is not measured in rubble or body counts. It is measured in intact streets, standing homes, and a population spared another winter of reconstruction. Within the Canadian command, the implications are understood quickly. A city that would have required artillery and close fighting has been secured without either. The advance continues with momentum intact, and with civilian support, strengthened rather than strained. Leo Major's role is not to broadcast in the moment. Operations move forward. Reports are filed. The war does not pause to recognize individual actions, but among those who review the night's decisions, there is an understanding that one man's persistence removed an entire layer of violence from the plan. Later, retellings will sometimes inflate the story. Numbers grow, details sharpen beyond what records can support. What remains constant across credible accounts is simpler and more durable. A reconnaissance mission prevented the destruction of a city. Zwolle's liberation becomes an example of something rarely highlighted in wartime histories. Not what was destroyed to achieve victory, but what was deliberately not destroyed when better information made restraint possible. In the weeks and years that follow, Zwolle remembers the night not as a battle, but as an absence of one. There are no ruins to point to, no single crossroads marked by a plaque for heavy fighting. The memory lives instead in testimony, in the recollections of civilians who expected shelling and woke to intact streets, and in Canadian records that note a city entered without resistance, where resistance had been anticipated. Leo Major's actions are later formally recognized by Canada. though even official citations remain cautious in their language. They focus on outcome rather than spectacle, initiative under fire, the successful completion of a mission beyond its original scope, and the preservation of civilian life through restraint rather than force. Historians continue to note where details diverge. Exact German unit strength is unclear. The precise sequence of every encounter cannot be reconstructed with certainty. These gaps do not weaken the event. They define it. What mattered was not the number of shots fired, but the decision those shots provoked. Zwolle itself eventually chooses to remember. Streets are named. Commemorations are held. Not to glorify combat, but to acknowledge the night when combat did not happen. This form of remembrance is rare. It honors judgment rather than aggression, patience rather than momentum. It recognizes that the outcome of war is shaped not only by decisive battles, but by moments when destruction is consciously avoided. By the time the war ends in Europe weeks later, Zwolle stands as it did before, occupied, then free, but not shattered. Its survival becomes part of the larger Allied advance, not as a footnote, but as proof that intelligence and individual initiative can alter the course of operations. The war continues elsewhere. Here, it has already moved on. Zwolle did not change the outcome of the Second World War, but it changed how victory arrived there. In a conflict defined by mass armies, industrial firepower, and destruction measured in square kilometers, this night turned on something smaller. Judgment exercised under pressure, and information gathered where maps were useless. What happened in April 1945 shows that warfare is not only about overwhelming force, it is about perception, timing, and restraint. A single infantryman, without authority or support, altered a plan designed around artillery and replaced it with certainty. The guns remained silent, not because the enemy was crushed, but because they chose not to stay. Technologically, nothing new was introduced. The weapons were ordinary. The terrain was familiar. What mattered was how uncertainty moved faster than orders, and how fear of encirclement outweighed the will to hold ground. From a leadership perspective, this was command exercised without command, responsibility taken without instruction. It was not heroism in pursuit of destruction, but discipline in pursuit of avoidance. For the civilians of Zwolle, the lesson was immediate and lasting. Liberation did not arrive as fire and rubble. It arrived as quiet streets and intact homes. And in the long view of history, that quiet matters. Because wars are remembered not only for the battles that were fought, but for the cities that survived, because one night, someone understood that the most decisive act was knowing when not to fire.